Dungeon Masters of Reddit, what is the most useless item you gave your party that they were still able to exploit? Magical rubber duck. Turns whatever body of water it is in slowly into the perfect bath, as in warm and bubbly. Chucked it in a piranha pit. About 20 minutes later the piranhas were all dead from poisoning via soap. Floaty rock. Rock that gains loses buoyancy based on its temperature. As a warlock with prestidigitation and a rope I could use it to hover and float very slowly. Had no way to steer but hey, useful when stuck in a pit or on a high place. Rat flute. Flute that summons a horde of rats. A lather-pied piper. Can also be used to control any rat-like being, including a criminal known as the Rat simply because he is a snitch. Had a lot of fun with that. I gave my players an amulet that lets them speak to rocks. The one player who picked it up spent most of that session talking to his new pet rock and would often interrogate rocks they find at scenes for information, usually getting either vague info or stuff they can clearly see already, because it's a rock. Later on another party member wanted to try talking to another rock, actually a pile of rocks made into a crude gravestone related to their character's backstory, only for the first party member to find out the amulet was cursed and they couldn't remove it. Later on they got it removed and had the amulet identified, where I revealed that the amulet only let them think they could speak to rocks and all the information they had asked of rocks was only information that was already known to them. They basically started using the now uncursed version of the amulet as a tool to ask me for information they had forgotten or needed clarity on, but in character rather than just ask me out of character, which was great. The amulet of fourth wall breaking clarification. A wand of lesser summon, only bringing out local creatures in celestial form. Fish, they picked fish. Just throwing trout in stacks to trigger traps and such. Need to slow down your pursuer men a fish. Need a distraction? Fish as thrown object. I told them that it can summon literally any local creature, but on every character sheet was the word fish gun. Just fish. We only need fish. Don't need no birds to fly and fetch us stuff. Don't need no bears to lend us their strength. Just fish please. I homebrewed the hat of many hats. It's a regular hat, but it's made of shift weft, so it can have the appearance of any other hat. It was part of a shop selling dodgy knockoffs of regular magical items. In this case, the hat of disguise. The halfling who always struggled with RP took it, and it became a great way to get her more involved in what her character would do. It started when she transmuted herself and I'm with stupid baseball cap to tease one of the other party members after he'd come up with some bull's plan, which led to one of the other players asking what this mysterious baseball was, and she just ran with it that it was a game they used to play back in her home region when they were kids. All of a sudden, she had a backstory, rather than just being I'm short and I stab things. I'm sure she would have come into RP eventually, but it was like giving her a dressing up box and seeing her realize that she could actually do things that weren't just purely mechanical. Some people can create a good story from nothing. Some people need a lattice to channel their story. I've found I am more the latter, where I have a set scenario and I work my story within that structure. Different people need different amounts of structure to build their stories. She might just need that structure to spread her wings. Player, not DM, was given an article that only cast Quicksand, that turned a certain volume of rock temporarily to Quicksand. High level characters, bit of a gag gift. My halfling got it. Small army of orcs approaching us. Narrow bridge. DM expects a massive fight that's going to test our HP and empty magic items. Q central portion of stone bridge turning into quicksand and dropping into the gulf below. Totally cutting off the orcs. We strolled off at leisure, aka how to get the DM to blink in silent confusion for 3 minutes as his game ended hours early. I gave the party a tiny bag of holding made of human skin. I don't remember why. They were trapped in a house fighting a zombie horde and they used the skin bag, turned it into a sort of Molotov bomb, used a spell to have it fly over the zombies, who followed the human skin away to be blown up. It was a 45-minute saga to get to that point and it was easily the funniest and most creative moment I've seen from the DM side. I gave the party a tiny bag of holding made of human skin. I don't remember why. The fact that you don't remember why you gave your party a tiny bag of holding made out of human freaking skin is deeply concerning. We had a rock that if you were knocked out with it, you were completely invulnerable while unconscious. You had to successfully hit yourself or whoever and take damage from being knocked unconscious from a rock to the skull. That rock caused so much chaos, and death, and life, and permanent head trauma to NPCs we were trying to rescue. Gave the party a magic whistle that summons pigeons. The party somehow used it to murder an orc commander by turning his armor into bread, having the pigeons eat it all, and then shooting him in the face with a blast of lightning. This is the first comment I've read where I think that was one heck of an out of the box solution. Remove the orc's armor bonus with pigeons. Healing Rock. Does 1d4 bludgeoning damage, but heals 1d4 plus 1 HP. It was supposed to be a funny way to bring characters back from unconsciousness by restoring a small bit of HP. Barbarians resist bludgeoning damage when raging. The Healing Rock became their go-to healing strategy for keeping the barbarian healed between fights. And that's why a healing cantrip couldn't ever be balanced. I gave them a folding boat. Say a magic word and the small shoebox magically expands into a boat. Not 5 minutes later, the freaking rogue has thrown this box from the roof and said the magic word, creating the only instance of 20 dice rolls I've ever had to do. I don't know raw rules as written, or rules as intended, if this is allowed, but damn it, throwing a boat at people is too dang fun to not allow it. Always be wary of giving your players anything that expands or increases in size at will command. They will toss that thing in a dragon's throat, and then you as the DM have to suffer calculating the tensile strength of dragon flesh versus the amount of material impacting it. A random encounter in the woods got the players a crow mask that makes it so you can only call like a crow when wearing, based off a Slay the Spire item. It can be removed without issue, so it's a silly flavor item. However, the players are convinced it's the secret MacGuffin of this campaign and keep trying to use it for everything. Most times are failures, but a few times, the stars align and it somehow works. They used it to calm a weird mutated child down so that they could ask it questions to learn about an ambush. They used enlarge and mask and super high deception and performance roll to convince a cult that the fighter was a stronger god than the one they were worshipping. They constantly use it to make every town guard think they are too much trouble to be worth hassling. That last one makes sense. Some town guard rolls up to the scene of a disturbance, sees some ripped fighter wearing a crow mask and making freakishly realistic crow noises, while surrounded by a gang of armed and armored adventurers. I wouldn't blame any guard for walking away. We acquired a brick mold along with some other basic tools when we found a workshop in a dungeon. It was supposed to just be some set dressing, but I took it anyway. We later used it and several more we made off of its design to reinforce a village that would soon come under attack. With everyone in the village making clay bricks for 2 weeks straight, we had enough of them to build a wall tall enough to make one of the ways into the town rather protected so we could focus the fighting on the other entrance where we could have more manpower at once. It saved a lot of lives since we weren't able to be flanked. Our DM would have just introduced a troll or the Kool-Aid man or something to get around this. Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I've been looking for an excuse to tell this story. I had a party of wizard, ranger, druid, summoner and barbarian back in Pathfinder 1e. All of the party members except for the barbarian had some kind of pet, be it an animal companion, familiar, or just the menagerie of animals the druid accumulated. A few sessions in, and my barbarian sends me a text while the party's setting up camp. The barbarian volunteers to take a watch, and the next morning the rest of the party wakes up to the barbarian's new pet, Brock the Rock. Brock was a stone with eyes and a mouth crudely carved into him. Brock goes on adventures with the party and is mostly forgotten about until a premature fight with that Arxenbus. The boss wipes the floor with the party, leaving everyone unconscious except the barbarian who has single-digit HP, not wanting to TPK, and with the boss in surprisingly worse shape than I expected. I have him taunt the barbarian and starts to fly away. Brock is going to take his attack, the barbarian says, throwing his pet with all his might. Crit, max damage on the roll. Boss drops to -1 hit points and faceplants at the barbarian's feet for the coup de grace, also performed by Brock to finish what he started. And that's how our party's pet rock gained a temporary flight speed of 40 feet, and favored enemy, verbal sorcerers. A grey bag that was stuck on rats. They abused it so much in one session. I created a huge rat god that came and attacked the party. It wasn't that they were overusing the item. It was that they were using it poorly, at one point pulling rats out and killing them in order to use their blood as dye. Our druid kept using her Feywild summons as exclusively as HP fodder in combat. Eventually she had to travel to the Feywild and see why they weren't accepting her summons. They were P and took her to a Fey court. One of the players had gotten married to a pretty young NPC who wasn't an adventurer, so I gave him a ring of conjugal visits that would transport him to his wife for an hour, then send him back to the adventuring group. The ring worked twice a week and was intended as a joke. When the party was beaten up from a hard combat, he used the ring and asked his wife where the nearest temple was, then bought healing potions from the local cleric. Soon this became a thing. Cure disease, healing, whatever. The ring became this guy's quick trip to the pharmacy, although he also always found a few moments for a quickie with his wife. Eventually he woke the up cleric at 3 AM to buy more potions. So I had the cleric throw a fit and yell at him never to come back. The player went back anyway, and the next time there was a bouncer at the temple door telling him to get lost. The player went back anyway, and the next time there was a bouncer at the temple door telling him to get lost. That's when you have his wife enter the temple instead of him, and then you use the ring once she's inside. One time our DM gave us a rod of summon boat as a joke, except we rolled a nat 20 for the summon and got a whole boat galleon. The campaign quickly became pirate themed as we became privateers. The jar of endless lard. I put it in as a joke and somehow they managed to set a forest in fire with a timed fuse. Also having them covering various body parts in said lard just to set it in fire for extra damage wasn't good. I use my fire fist. DM, but you don't have a fire fist. Light's greased up arm. I do now. They got a vaguely sword-shaped branch of Ashwood. That was it. This was in a planescape setting. So a few hours later the sorcerer persuaded an apologetic djinn that the adjectives were unordered. So it in fact was a sword shaped like it was vaguely a branch of Ashwood. To make amends for destroying part of the party's inventory, the djinn remade the sword per the sorcerer's description while under a compulsion of truth. So was born Sylvan Blade. Tweezers of Boat bottling. You have gained the ability to put ships into bottles with these tweezers. Mfers were sneaking into dockyards at night and stealing entire fleets. And when the navy finally caught on, they would sail away and toss said shrunken boats in bottles at the navy boats following them, causing them to rapidly expand. Then they started to plan bottle boatception, putting bottled boats onto full-size boats and then bottling that boat over and over again, effectively creating a dozen boats to rapidly expand in one town by tossing one bottle. I had to shut that down quick. This one made me laugh aloud because I instantly saw how this would go horribly wrong. I gave my players a torch that couldn't be lit by normal means. After 2 or 3 sessions, one of them finally asked how to light it. I had totally forgotten about it by this point, so I made the NPC mention that it could only be lit by an Elder Red Dragon's breath weapon, and once lit would burn forever. Suddenly, the entire party of 3rd and 4th level toons decides they want to veer off course and get this thing lit. I gave my players a chalice that, when drunk from, caused the user to sweat fat profusely. They used it to overcome a cold base trap in the dungeon. It was a hallway that got progressively colder, so they emerge on the other end, covered in fat, into the chamber of the dungeon boss. It was a slippery fight. My favorite magic item my players found was a totally homebrewed item with no real productive function, but they still got creative with it. They found the pie stone. Holding this stone in your hand and concentrating will fill a 25-foot radius area with the stone as the center with the smell of a pie of your choice. This effect lasts for 10 minutes or until you dismiss the effect. The rogue used it to sneak past guard and as a distraction tactic when scouting and such. Not a DM, but the last campaign I was in, the DM gave us a regenerative oasis that only appears to people that need it. The party was messing around with throwing bones in it and bringing the animals they belonged to back to life. One of the other players had the thought to throw the hat of the deceased king into the water, and brought the king back to life because of a single hair. The DM hadn't even considered that possibility, because the session was supposed to be our beach episode. It would have been pretty funny for one of them to jump in and an ogre to suddenly appear because its blood was on their armor or something. I gave my party a stick that endlessly dripped with water, salt water to be exact. I didn't expect them to have any use for it, but they decided, hey, you know what would be a great trap for this corrupt noble? Getting his marble floors wet at the top of the stairs. The noble ended up dead. The fact that they could have achieved the exact same thing with an entirely mundane cup makes this even funnier. I gave them a carpet, they used it to kill 6 people. Never underestimate a living rug. My father has a stoner dwarf bro that developed rug triggered PTSD due to almost dying to one 3 times in one sitting. My DM gave me an eye. Player here. We had an NPC stalking us through the travel portion of the campaign and would show up and do odd things like pull out his eye and show it to us, and then pop it back in. Just gross stuff because he was undead. One time I used a pickpocket check to take it from him, and he insisted that I give it back to him. We were in the temple for the god of trickery, which we both worshipped. So I put his eye in the collection plate. He could either take it out and suffer the consequence, or lose the eye for good. That was a great moment. I gave them a wand that projected a hologram fish on the air about 15 feet ahead of them. They used it to lure all the giant crocodiles from a lake they were supposed to clear out into a trap. Smart. Not a DM, but my friend is, and he told me about a sword he gave a party. He called it the normal sword. When his players asked if there was anything special about it, all he would say is, it's just a normal sword. In practice it was so normal that it would negate all magic. His party never figured that out though. I'd replace just a normal sword with an exceptionally normal sword, just to slip a clue in there for the experienced paranoid without being too obvious and spoiling it. In our very first session, the fighter just really wanted to steal from the quest giver's house, so I gave her an ornamental dagger that was basically useless outside of selling it. 10 sessions later they used it as a gift to bribe their way into a royal wedding. I gave my players a rock of gravity detection, which is exactly what it sounds like. They got it early on in the campaign, and when dropped it would accelerate until terminal velocity to the nearest center of gravity. So basically it was a rock that would just act like a normal rock, until way later in the campaign they found themselves floating aimlessly through the astral plane searching for the soul of another player trapped in a keep on a small chunk of land that had been previously transported to the astral plane. They didn't have much to go on as, well, they were essentially floating in a void. Then one of my players pulls out the rock of gravity detection. I tried to argue that it's just a rock so it just floats there, but due to what I thought was a clever wording, my own wording, they argued it should accelerate towards the nearest center of gravity. Yeah, they found the keep. The rock immediately accelerates towards the nearest player. I gave my players a pig whistle. Once a day, they could blow the whistle and summon a pig. I hadn't given too much thought about it, but they used it constantly. They would send pigs off to spring traps. They would have impromptu luau's to curry favor with peasants. They never had to worry about rations again. Pork for dinner. I thought it was just a useless throwaway item, but they sure proved me wrong. Good times. I had a bit called the bargain bin, where I would just improv something stupid, mostly stupid made up on the spot spells. My favorite was a bag of holding that held exactly as much as a bag of that volume would hold. What I didn't expect was them getting creative. They just made the bag bigger by sewing more onto it, and then rolled it up. Still cumbersome, as I forced extra turns to use the thing if they wanted to use it in combat, but was a great laugh at how they undermined my balls. Since it weighs 15 pounds regardless of internal weight, it was still a tool. Frost sock. Everyone's feet became blocks of ice. They did it, and immediately nat 20'd on a melee, so I went with it caused enemies' feet to detach from their ankle and stay stuck to the floor. Swarm of flies. Just a swarm of flies. No damage. Just annoying. They used it inside a tavern to create a wild distraction, and made their own entrance into the plot-related area. Bluntify weapons. A spell that creates a magical barrier that prevents the weapon from ever making contact with anything. Has to be done while holding the weapon. So they just snuck into a guard's armory and did it to all their weapons, and then robbed a bank. I still threw them some curveballs like it still caused a knockback, and well, this guy owns his own weapons and kept them at his house that night, so he can still stabby. We had barrels of rum we had liberated from a pirate ship hold and came upon a cellar being used as a nest by an army of huge spiders. We soaked rats in rum and got the rats pee drunk, then turned them loose in the spider room. They were eaten. The giant spiders were having a wild party by this point and going batshit. Then we charged in and hacked our way through without anyone dying. This was more rare than it should have been because we had a party of mostly flavorful squishy characters and were getting killed by things we shouldn't have on a regular basis. The spiders are reluctant to pause their arachnid orgy, and also drunk as frick from the Rum Rats. They roll 3 at disadvantage. Ran an alien RPG session one Halloween. There was a wrench, like a normal red wrench. More than anything, it was just something funny that they'd check on in. They'd ask every 10 minutes or so if the wrench was still there, which it always was. They used it to adjust some of the piping in the oxygen recycling room, pumped a section of the space station full of pure oxygen, and then proceeded to incinerate a handful of xenomorphs and my ubermorph. Don't mix Pyrrhus with real world engineers. Should have had that wrench be snuck out by an alien when one of them turned their back and taught them true fear. A 2-ton lead sphere that was supposed to be part of a rolling boulder trap. Instead they stopped it with Wall of Force, then sold it to various metalsmiths. Also, a door made out of an incredibly dense unidentifiable silvery metal. They passed it off as solid platinum. Players, I'm sorry, but this incredibly easy and obvious puzzle can't be solved. Also players, yes, this useless item can be used for genocide. Priorities, man. My party were camping in a barn and made friends with a goose. I allowed them to take the goose with them as a guard goose emergency food. In the process of dungeon crawling they find a gold bracer. The cuff was a soul-bound item that would cause whoever wore it to randomly be possessed by a Lich King, with the idea that the next quest would be removing it from the affected party member. After thorough inspection the party discovered an evil aura surrounding the cuff, so they put it on the goose. The theory was that since the goose was chaotic neutral it would balance out the evil of the bracer. So now they had a chaotic neutral guard goose that would randomly be possessed by a neutral evil lich, take on the appearance of a zombie goose and cast random spells, though a series of honks and hisses. Sounds like an ordinary goose to me. The Brooch of Glamour. It was a brooch made by a powerful wizard for his wife as a gift. 2 times per day it could have you looking your best. Body clean and fresh, all clothes perfectly clean, mended and as good as new, hair perfectly coiffed, makeup done the way you like it. It was meant to add some color, and the party wizard, a human woman, claimed it. There was talk of using it to fix and clean everyone's clothes etc. Discussions about whether it could mend armor, it couldn't, etc. But the real effect was during a showdown with a BBEG. The wizard also had a ring of fire resistance, as well as a unique item called a blast scepter. The blast scepter was sort of like a buffed wand of fireballs, but also gave the wearer resistance to both explosive damage and fire resistance. Stacked with the ring of fire resistance, the wizard would take 1 stroke 4th damage from fireballs, and no damage on a successful save, with huge saving throw bonuses. Facing off against the BBEG who happened to be a fire wizard, she taunted him out in the open to give her his best shot. Boom, huge enhanced fireball, smoke clears, and there stands the wizard without a scratch on her or even so much as a singe, except now her hair is done up in an elaborate style, her makeup is on point and her clothes are crisp and clean. She basically was immune to fireballs, but the psychological effect of giving your enemy your best shot and now their makeup and hair is done and their clothes are clean and pressed made the BBEG run for it. Psychological warfare at its finest. Father of a DM here. During lockdown our 24-year-old son was living at home, so could play with his usual crew, so we agreed to Sunday morning family D&D sessions and actually quite enjoyed it. His mum was a cook who had a magic ladle that could produce any liquid. I asked if she could throw the contents. He said it would have a 5-meter range. He was expecting her to produce a healing soup, and he had to Google hydrofluoric acid when I said she should lob that at some kobolds. The lesson here is never use the word any when making a magic item. My DM allowed our thief to own an incredibly stale baguette. We murdered and tortured so many orcs with stale bread. Dwarf bread. Not a DM but a player. DM let us keep a discarded clam at a fish market that we then used to trap the soul of the main antagonist into a clam. Not me, but I remember reading a story about a party constantly pestering the DM with give us an item of unlimited something, until DM caved in. He gave them an item that created unlimited boxes with roughly the same structural integrity of thin cardboard. No merchant would pay any money for them, and they couldn't be decomposed into any reagents. They still used them with weightlessness to reach high places. Stack up enough broken boxes and you have a slope you can just walk up. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.